Maximilien François-Marie Isidore de Robespierre was a French lawyer and politician, and one of the best-known and most influential figures of the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. As a member of the Estates General, the Constituent Assembly and the Jacobean Club, he opposed the death penalty and advocated the abolition of slavery, while supporting equality of rights, universal male suffrage and the establishment of a republic. He opposed the de-Christianization of France, war with Austria and the possibility of a coup by the Marquis de Lafayette. As a member of the Committee of Public Safety, he was an important figure during the period of the Revolution commonly known as the Reign of Terror, which ended a few months after his arrest and execution in July 1794 following the Thermidorian reaction. The Thermidorians accused him of being the soul of the Terror, although his guilt in the brutal excesses of the Terror has not been proven. Influenced by 18th-century Enlightenment philosophists such as Rousseau and Montesquieu, he was a capable articulator of the beliefs of the left-wing bourgeoisie and Dadaist. His steadfast adherence and defense of the views he expressed earned him the nickname L'Incorruptible. His reputation has gone through cycles. It peaked in the 1920s when the influential French historian Albert Mathis argued he was an eloquent spokesman for the poor and oppressed, an enemy of royalist intrigues, a vigilant adversary of dishonest and corrupt politicians, a guardian of the French Republic, an intrepid leader of the French revolutionary government, and a prophet of a socially responsible state. In more recent times his reputation has suffered as historians associate him with radical purification of politics by the killing of enemies. Early life. Maximilien Robespierre was born in Arras, in the old French province of Artois. His family has been traced back to the 12th century in Picardy. Some of his direct ancestors in the male line worked as notaries in the village of Calvin near Arras from the beginning of the 17th century. It has been suggested that he was of Irish descent, his surname possibly being a corruption of Robespierre's. George Henry Lewis, Ernest Hamel, Jules Michelet, Alphonse de Lamartine, and Hilaire Belloc have all cited this theory, although there appears to be little supporting evidence. His paternal grandfather, also named Maximilien de Robespierre, established himself in Arras as a lawyer. His father, François-Maximilien Barthélemy de Robespierre, also a lawyer at the Conseil d'Artois, married Jacqueline Marguerite Caro, the daughter of a brewer, on the 2nd of January 1758. Maximilien was the oldest of 4 children and was conceived out of wedlock. His siblings were Charlotte, Henriette, and Augustin. On the 7th of July 1764, Madame de Robespierre gave birth to a stillborn son. She died 9 days later. Devastated by his wife's death, François de Robespierre subsequently left Arras and travelled throughout Europe, only occasionally living in Arras, until his death in Munich on 6 November 1777. The children were brought up by their paternal aunts Eulalie and Henriette de Robespierre. Already literate at age 8, Maximilien started attending the College of Arras. In October 1769, on the recommendation of the bishop, he obtained his scholarship at the Lycée Louis-le-Grand in Paris. Robespierre studied there until age 23, receiving his training as a lawyer. Upon his graduation, he received a 600 livres special prize for 12 years of exemplary academic success and personal good conduct. In school he learned to admire the idealized Roman Republic and the rhetoric of Cicero, Cato, and other classic figures. His fellow pupils included Camille Desmoulins and Stanislas Ferrin. He also read Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau during this time and adopted many of his principles. Robespierre grew intrigued by the idea of a virtuous self, a man who stands alone accompanied only by his conscience. Shortly after his 1775 coronation, King Louis XVI visited Louis-le-Grand. Robespierre, then 17 and a prize-winning student, had been chosen out of 500 pupils to deliver a speech to welcome the king. Perhaps due to rain, the royal couple remained in their coach throughout the ceremony and promptly left at its completion. Early politics. As an adult, and possibly even as a young man, the greatest influence on Robespierre's political ideas was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Robespierre's conception of revolutionary virtue and his program for constructing political sovereignty out of direct democracy came from Rousseau, and, in pursuit of these ideals, he eventually became known during the Jacobean Republic as the Incorruptible. Robespierre believed that the people of France were fundamentally good and were therefore capable of advancing the public well-being of the nation. Having completed his law studies, Robespierre was admitted to the Arras bar. The Bishop of Arras, Louis-François-Marc Hilaire de Conzié, appointed him criminal judge in the Diocese of Arras in March 1782. Although this appointment did not prevent him from practicing at the bar, he soon resigned owing to discomfort in ruling on capital cases arising from his early opposition to the death penalty. He quickly became a successful advocate and chose, on principle, to represent the poor. During court hearings, he was known often to advocate the ideals of the Enlightenment and argue for the rights of man. Later in his career, he read widely, and also became interested in society in general. He became regarded as one of the best writers and most popular young men of Arras. In December 1783, he was elected a member of the Academy of Arras, the meetings of which he attended regularly. In 1784, he obtained a medal from the Academy of Metz for his essay on the question of whether the relatives of a condemned criminal should share his disgrace. He and Pierre-Louis de la Crételle, an advocate and journalist in Paris, divided the prize. Many of his subsequent essays were less successful, but Robespierre was compensated for these failures by his popularity in the literary and musical society at Arras, known as the Rosartia. In its meetings he became acquainted with Lazare Carnot, who would later become his colleague on the Committee of Public Safety. In 1788, he took part in a discussion of how the French provincial government should be elected, arguing in his address à la nation artésienne that if the former mode of election by the members of the provincial estates were again adopted, the new Estates General would not represent the people of France. It is possible he addressed this issue so that he could have a chance to take part in the proceedings and thus change the policies of the monarchy. King Louis XVI later announced new elections for all provinces, thus allowing Robespierre to run for the position of deputy for the Third Estate. Although the leading members of the corporation were elected, Robespierre, the chief opponent, succeeded in getting elected with them. In the assembly of the bailliage, rivalry ran still higher, but Robespierre had begun to make his mark in politics with the Avis aux habitants de la campagne. With this, he secured the support of the country electors, and, although only 30, comparatively poor, and lacking patronage, he was elected 5th deputy of the Third Estate of Artois to the Estates General. When Robespierre arrived at Versailles, he was relatively unknown, but he soon became part of the representative National Assembly, which then transformed into the Constituent Assembly. While the Constituent Assembly occupied itself with drawing up a constitution, Robespierre turned from the assembly of provincial lawyers and wealthy bourgeois to the people of Paris. He was a frequent speaker in the Constituent Assembly, voicing many ideas for the Declaration of the Rights of Man and constitutional provisions, often with great success. He was eventually recognized as second only to Pétion de Villeneuve. If second, he was, as a leader of the small body of the extreme left, the 30 Voices, as Mirabeau contemptuously called them, Jacobean Club. Robespierre soon became involved with the new Society of the Friends of the Constitution, known eventually as the Jacobean Club. This had consisted originally of the deputies from Brittany only. After the Assembly moved to Paris, the club began to admit various leaders of the Parisian bourgeoisie to its membership. As time went on, many of the more intelligent artisans and small shopkeepers became members of the club. Among such men, Robespierre found a sympathetic audience. As the wealthier bourgeois of Paris and right-wing deputies seceded from the Club of 1789, the influence of the old leaders of the Jacobins, such as Barnave of Duport, Alexandre de Lameth, diminished. When they, alarmed at the progress of the revolution, founded the Club of the Feuillants in 1791, the left, including Robespierre and his friends, dominated the Jacobean Club. On 15 May 1791, Robespierre proposed and carried the motion that no deputy who sat in the Constituent could sit in the succeeding Assembly. The flight on 20 June, and subsequent arrest at Varennes of Louis XVI and his family resulted in Robespierre declaring himself at the Jacobean Club to be ni monarchist ni républicain. But this stance was not unusual. Very few at this point were avowed Republicans. In 1790 he lived at Rue de Saint-Onge, No. 9. At the time, it was a remote area of the Tuileries. However, after the massacre on the Champ de Mars on 17 July 1791, fearing for his safety and in order to be nearer to the Assembly and the Jacobins, he moved to live in the house of Maurice Duplay, a cabinet-maker residing in the Rue Saint-Honoré and an ardent admirer of Robespierre. Robespierre lived there until his death. In fact, according to his doctor, Soubiel Villati, a juror on the Revolutionary Tribunal, and his host's youngest daughter, he became engaged to the eldest daughter of his host, Eleanor Duplay. The sister of Maximilien claims that the wife of Maurice Duplay wished to marry her daughter to the incorruptible, but this hope was never realized. On 30 September, on the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly, the people of Paris named Pétion and Robespierre as the two incorruptible patriots in an attempt to honor their purity of principles, their modest ways of living, and their refusal of bribes and offers. With the dissolution of the Assembly, he returned to Arras for a short visit, where he met with a triumphant reception. In November, he returned to Paris to take the position of public prosecutor of Paris. Opposition to war with Austria. In February 1792, Jacques-Pierre Brissot, one of the leaders of the Girondist party in the Legislative Assembly, urged that France should declare war against Austria. Robespierre was also convinced that the internal stability of the country was more important. This opposition from expected allies irritated the Girondists, and the war became a major point of contention between the factions. Robespierre countered, a revolutionary war must be waged to free subjects and slaves from unjust tyranny, not for the traditional reasons of defending dynasties and expanding frontiers. Indeed, argued Robespierre, such a war could only favor the forces of counter-revolution, since it would play into the hands of those who oppose the sovereignty of the people. The risks of Cæsarism were clear, for in wartime the powers of the generals would grow at the expense of ordinary soldiers, and the power of the king and court at the expense of the assembly. These dangers should not be overlooked, he reminded his listeners. In troubled periods of history, generals often became the arbiters of the fate of their countries. Robespierre warned against the threat of dictatorship, stemming from war, in the following terms: if they are Caesars or Cromwells, they seize power for themselves. If they are spineless courtiers, uninterested in doing good yet dangerous when they seek to do harm, they go back to lay their power at their master's feet, and help him to resume arbitrary power on condition they become his chief servants. Robespierre also argued that force was not an effective or proper way of spreading the ideals of the revolution. The most extravagant idea that can arise in a politician's head is to believe that it is enough for a people to invade a foreign country to make it adopt their laws and their constitution. No one loves armed missionaries. The Declaration of the Rights of Man is not a lightning bolt which strikes every throne at the same time. I am far from claiming that our revolution will not eventually influence the fate of the world, but I say that it will not be today. In April 1792, Robespierre resigned the post of public prosecutor of Versailles, which he had officially held but never practiced since February, and started a journal, Le Défense de la Constitution. The journal served multiple purposes: countering the influence of the royal court in public policy, defending Robespierre from the accusations of Girondist leaders, and also giving voice to the economic interests of the broader masses in Paris and beyond. The National Convention. When the Legislative Assembly declared war against Austria on 20 April 1792, Robespierre responded by working to reduce the political influence of the officer class, the generals and the king, while arguing for the welfare of common soldiers. Robespierre urged new promotions to mitigate domination of the officer class by the aristocratic École militaire. Along with other Jacobins, he also urged the creation of popular militias to defend France. This sentiment reflected the perspective of more radical Jacobins, including those of the Marseille Club, who in May and June 1792 wrote to Pétion and the people of Paris. Here and at Toulon, we have debated the possibility of forming a column of 100,000 men to sweep away our enemies. Paris may have need of help. Call on us, because French forces had suffered disastrous defeats and a series of defections at the onset of the war. Robespierre and Danton feared the possibility of a military coup d'état, above all led by the Marquis de Lafayette, who in June advocated the suppression of the Jacobean Club. Robespierre publicly attacked him in scathing terms. "General, while from the midst of your camp you declared war upon me, which ye had thus far spared for the enemies of our state, while you denounced me as an enemy of liberty to the army, National Guard and nation in letters published by your purchased papers, I had thought myself only disputing with a general, but not yet the dictator of France, arbitrator of the state." In early June, Robespierre proposed an end to the monarchy and the subordination of the Assembly to the popular will. Following the king's veto of the Legislative Assembly's efforts to raise a militia and suppress non-juring priests, the monarchy faced an abortive insurrection on 20 June, exactly 3 years after the tennis court oath. Revolutionary militia entered Paris without the king's approval, and on 10 August 1792, Insurrectionary National Guard of Paris, sans-culottes, led a successful assault upon the Tuileries Palace with the intention of overthrowing the monarchy. On 16 August, Robespierre presented the petition of the Commune to the Legislative Assembly, demanding the establishment of a revolutionary tribunal and the summoning of a convention chosen by universal suffrage. Dismissed from his command of the French Northern Army, Lafayette fled France along with other sympathetic officers. In September, Robespierre was elected first deputy for Paris to the National Convention. Robespierre and his allies took the benches high at the back of the hall, giving them the label, the Montagnards, or the mountain. Below them were the Manéga of the Girondists, and then the plain of the Independents. The Girondists at the convention accused Robespierre of failing to stop the September massacres. On 26 September, the Girondist Marc-David Lassource accused Robespierre of wanting to form a dictatorship. Rumors spread that Robespierre, Marat and Danton were plotting to establish a triumvirate. On 29 October, Louvet-Découvray attacked Robespierre in a speech, possibly written by Madame Roland. On 5 November, Robespierre defended himself, the Jacobean Club and his supporters in and beyond Paris. "Upon the Jacobins I exercise, if we are to believe my accusers, a despotism of opinion, which can be regarded as nothing other than the forerunner of dictatorship. Firstly, I do not know what a dictatorship of opinion is, above all in a society of free men, unless this describes nothing more than the natural compulsion of principles. In fact, this compulsion hardly belongs to the man who enunciates them, it belongs to universal reason and to all men who wish to listen to its voice. It belongs to my colleagues of the Constituent Assembly, to the patriots of the Legislative Assembly, to all citizens who will invariably defend the cause of liberty. Experience has proven, despite Louis XVI and his allies, that the opinion of the Jacobins and of the popular clubs were those of the French nation. No citizen has made them, and I did nothing other than share in them. Turning the accusations upon his accusers, Robespierre delivered one of the most famous lines of the French Revolution to the Assembly. I will not remind you that the sole object of contention dividing us is that you have instinctively defended all acts of new ministers, and we, of principles, that you seem to prefer power, and we equality. Why don't you prosecute the Commune, the Legislative Assembly, the sections of Paris, the assemblies of the cantons and all who imitated us? For all these things have been illegal as the Revolution, as the fall of the monarchy and of the Bastille, as illegal as liberty itself. Citizens, do you want a revolution without a revolution? What is this spirit of persecution which has directed itself against those who freed us from chains? Robespierre's speech marked a profound political break between the Montagnards and the Girondins, strengthening the former in the context of an increasingly revolutionary situation punctuated by the fall of Louis XVI, the invasion of France and the September massacres in Paris. It also heralded increased involvement and intervention by the sans-culottes in revolutionary politics.